number one, I think, focusing on the fundamentals is critical because you can't lift up your head to focus on the things coming, without making sure that your foundation is solid and ready to go.
Welcome to Technovation. I'm your host, Peter High. My guest today is Megan Crespi. Megan is the Chief Operating Officer of Comerica Bank, a financial services institution that's based in Dallas, Texas, and earns in excess of $5.2 billion in annual revenue. She was promoted into her current role 2 years ago after spending roughly 3 as the company's Chief Operations and Technology Officer. I look forward to hearing more about how her role has grown and the role digital innovation plays at an organization like Comerica. Prior to her current post, Megan was the Chief Technology Officer of Ally Bank. Megan, welcome back to Technovation. It's great to speak with you today.
Hi, Peter. Great to speak with you and the audience as well.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Well, maybe we begin, if you don't mind, just with a little table setting. Can you talk a bit about Comerica's business in your own words?
Yeah, absolutely. So Comerica is a regional bank headquartered in Dallas. We were proud to celebrate our 175th birthday or anniversary, as we might say, last year in 2024. It's a really significant accomplishment for any business, let alone a bank. We've weathered many, many storms throughout that 175 years. The majority of that was headquartered here where I am in the Metro Detroit area. Our headquarters was established back in 1849, right, here in Detroit. So we have a long, proud heritage and legacy, and we've been very focused on building a bold vision for our future as well. We're predominantly a commercial bank, but we importantly have a strong retail offering and wealth management business as well. And those are really our 3 major lines of business here at the bank. We've been very focused on payments and payment capabilities across all of the customer segments we serve. And that has been a key area of focus for us, especially over the last few years since I joined.
Yeah, well, and roughly 5 years ago it is that you joined.
Yeah.
And talk a bit about your latest role. I mentioned you are now the Chief Operating Officer of the company, and an expansion of your responsibilities from the role that you had for your first 3 years with the organization. Talk about what's in your purview now.
Yeah, so I joined, as you mentioned, Peter, back in March of 2020, which was a really interesting time given COVID, right? It had long been arranged, prior to even being able to spell COVID, of course. And I joined at a time of great uncertainty, not necessarily for the bank in particular, but more broadly, for all of us personally, the economy more broadly, and so on. So it's been a really interesting time, to be a part of this organization over this past 5 years. About 2 years ago, our CEO, Kurt Farmer, made the determination to really think differently about the executive team. We've continued to maintain, a very strong management executive committee that consists of, I think, about 16 of us across the company who lead various divisions and departments that are critical to the bank. But at that time, back in early 2023, Kurt announced that Peter Sevcik would lead all of our revenue lines as the Chief Banking Officer, that Megan Burkhart would lead as Chief Administrative Officer, really combining her prior role as the CHRO with some of the other focus areas like communications, ESG, and the like. And then at that time, he elevated my position to Chief Operating Officer, really with regard to the fact that technology plays such a central role in everything the bank does, that we've been on more of a digital transformation journey the last few years as we've really sought out that bold vision for our future. And because really the evolution of how we think about the ways in which our channels that crosses, the digital channels, including the web, mobile, and others, as well as our contact centers, in particular for our retail consumers, and our branches, our banking centers, as we call them here at Comerica, and our wealth management offices and our physical offices like the one I'm sitting in today, how those in combination, all of those channels really serve our various customers across customer segments. All of those are under my purview here at the bank. And so really, as Kurt thought through it, he made those few changes and created an executive committee that's comprised of 8 of what had formerly been the management executive committee. So we have an executive committee of 8 and then a management executive committee that consists of the same 8 plus a complement of other critical leaders who are leading the most critical functions here at the bank, including our chief information officer, who's on my team, Bruce Mitchell.
That's a great overview. Thank you for explaining all of that, Megan. And I wonder, as you've taken on a broader set of responsibilities, how you have processed the wisdom of the combination you've described, and maybe even by extension, the extent to which you'd care to comment, the extent to which it's facilitated things by having other executives, as you just described, who also have had comparable expansions of purview and the like. Talk a bit further about that, if you would.
Yeah, my view is, we've really benefited from being really focused. The revenue lines all coming together. So we're thinking about our customers, as a set across the continuum. We are the leading bank for business. That's been our tagline for some time. We raised expectations of what a bank can be across all of our customer segments. And for me to interact, for example, with Peter Sepsic and his leaders, to really align how we in the Chief Operating Office are enabling those capabilities that, his team most wants and needs, whether that's the sales teams, the product teams, and even some of the teams that are providing operational support to the products and services we're offering today in the marketplace, and some that we've evolved and have begun to offer over the last few years. So it's been really helpful and useful from an alignment standpoint to ensure that every investment dollar, the choices that we need to make are intentional, that every time you choose to invest a dollar in this thing, it means you're choosing not to invest a dollar in this other thing. And so ensuring that, for example, technology is not in the back room working on a set of things that aren't aligned with the business strategy and where we most want and need to go. The same in turn, where the revenue leader of the business and his leaders have a same shared appreciation of the places where we need to make cybersecurity investments or even technology investments to ensure that we're keeping pace with where the bad actors, the threat vectors, the things that are happening more broadly in the industry that we're protecting Comerica from. So not every dollar is available for business enablement strategy, but sharing that in a very transparent way with all of the leaders across the bank so that we have, the same understanding of what's really required and where we have decisions to make, and we can line up in a way that we have confidence that we're providing, the best solutions to our customer base and keeping their money and their personal information safe and sound.
Talk a bit about the team you lead. You mentioned your CIO, but talk about you have 9 reports, if I recall correctly from past conversations, most of whom you hired through the course of your tenure in the organization. So you have more direct reports than your CEO does. But talk a bit about the team that you lead, if you would.
Sure. So, when I joined back in 2020, as I mentioned, we have the benefit as a 175-year-old bank of having a very long tenured organization. No one here, 175 years, of course. But part of the beauty and the brilliance of Comerica really lies in, the fact that our colleague base is very committed to who Comerica is for our customers and clients. We're a relationship bank first and foremost. And that long tenure really demonstrates that. It really proves that. And it's in fact why so many of our customers tell us they've stuck and stayed with us as long as they have, is because of their relationships they've built that have been, long lasting. So when I joined, there were a few members of my leadership team who were heading into almost that retirement phase, who, gave me the opportunity to work with them for, a few years before I needed to kind of seek their successors and so on. So I have had the opportunity to really get to know the environment here at Comerica. You mentioned in the intro, I had been the CTO at Ally Bank. Ally's the same in some ways, but also very different. Online-only retail bank that, has been in existence about 15 years now. But otherwise, an over 100-year-old, former GMAC auto finance company, right? And so kind of a tale of two cities in some ways. But what's really different here at Comerica is given our commercial orientation, we haven't plowed the digital path quite as quickly, and we didn't do it quite as early as banks like Ally and some other of our competitors have done. So for us, as I got in the door, I couldn't just lay down a playbook of what worked well at Ally from my seat and applied that consistently here at Comerica. I don't think that's true. Anytime you change roles, every company is different. It's not a case of a bank is a bank is a bank. There's uniqueness that you need to listen and look for to really understand, hey, which experiences have I had? What tools do I have in the toolbox I brought with me over the course of my career that apply here? And how do they apply? And so I had that sort of luxury out of the chute to really circle around with my direct reports at the time and understand more about who the company is, what our aspirations are and our goals, and how to really compose the leadership team within Tech and Ops, that is the organization that I run, in a way that enables us to see a future that may be a bit different from the past, that aligns to that, as I said, that bold vision for, the next chapter in our very long book. And so my first hire was, in fact, our CIO, Bruce Mitchell, who joined us in November of 2020. Soon after that, I hired Juan Rodriguez as our Chief Information Security Officer, who joined us February of 21. So that'll be 4 years this next month. And then from there, I sort of used that playbook over and over again as I sought additional talent to add to the leadership team. It's really a combination of three things, Peter. It's people who have done some of the ITs that we most aspire to do. I know that's a really technical term, but some of the things that through that listening tour and my ability to understand more about, who we are as the company and where we want to go, what are those things we really want to do? And looking for talent that has had some of those experiences more directly. And then secondly, people who know what good and maybe not so good looks like, and they know the difference between the two. And then third, and equally as important, I kind of think of it as a balanced triangle of sorts, people who have the bedside manner to bring everyone along. And what I mean by that is that in a long tenured culture, where you're coming in new, if you don't have the humility to listen and to understand that there's a lot that's going on that's right in the environment you've walked into, even if we want to change, modify, or transform going forward, you'll go off to the races as a leader, but when you look back, everyone still is at the starting line, and you can't get much done as a team if that's the case. So really, on balance, those are the three things. Jackie Woodard came to join us back effectively May 1st of 2023. She joined us from a couple of different banks where she led commercial loan operations, commercial lending operations. Those were banks of similar size to us, a bit bigger, but more of a regional bank footprint. And she started her career at some of the biggest banks. But she's made operations a profession. In fact, in the interview process, this is one of the first things she said to me. She said, Megan, make no mistake, operations is a profession in and of itself. And I thought, wow, I'm sold, right? But, that gives you an example. Jackie Woodard, moved to the Metro Detroit area, relocated to where I am today in our Great Lakes Operations Center, Great Lakes campus from Boston, and really joined on the premise of using the things that she had learned in other banks to help us transform to get to the next level in commercial lending operations to support our customers. She knows what the art of the possible is. She knows what good looks like in that regard. She's had enough examples of that in her career, and she can point the teams to that North Star and lead them forward toward it. That would be another example. In the same time frame, those are some of the examples of leaders who have come in to join what, when I first started, was part of Tech and Ops proper. Since that time, we've also taken on contact centers as new to Tech and Ops. And I hired Alan Harari, who came to us from USAA in San Antonio. USAA is known for their member experience, and it was important to us to have someone join who really understands contact center and has spent their career focused in contact center capabilities, and again, knows what good looks like, knows where the industry is, where the industry standards are, what is best in class. And that's really helped us to evolve the services we provide to our customers and clients. I would be remiss if I didn't mention, we also created a chief data and analytics office and hired Saba Dasani to come and join us back in March of last year. She's a real leader from a number of different banks, as well as some other companies prior to that in her tenure and in her storied career. But she's driving us toward a lot of standardization around data so that we can be prepared for, what I think, if I'm not buying into the hype cycle, but what I think is the AI revolution that certainly is at our doorstep now. And lastly, Derek Latka, who joined us back in August of last year to really supercharge our enterprise PMO and to enable more of a focus on change management overall from an enterprise change management and PMO, which is just in the early days of being established here at the bank. I think I've gotten most of the team. Oh, and Amy Pilibet, how can I forget? I've mentioned now twice this beautiful office where I'm sitting today. We opened these offices, 2,100 of our colleagues, which, we're about a 7,500 person company. So 2,100 of our colleagues office here in Metro Detroit at our new Great Lakes campus that opened officially late this past summer, which was really the consolidation of a number of our own sites that we're able to sell and monetize to build out a beautiful new site like this, where we've got really the benefit of increased collaboration and all sorts of whiz-bang technology and things that really benefit our colleagues in serving their customers overall. Amy's been here with the company 27 years. She's our longest tenured of the staff on my team, and just does a terrific job for our colleagues and for our customers. She also took over branch or banking center real estate operations back in the last couple of years as well. So that we've got more consistency across our banking centers, our wealth management offices, and our other facilities.
That's a fantastic overview. Thank you so much for that, Megan. And you mentioned a couple of times through the conversation so far, the storied 175-year history of this organization. And there's so many advantages to that of strong and longstanding reputation of the great customer base that you have built, the reputation you have in the business community, as you pointed out as well. Naturally, there's a lot of legacy in the pejorative sense that builds up across, as any organization would, even if they were a tenth of that age. And I wonder if you could share a bit, and you did a little bit actually in your description of the different roles and responsibilities that your team have. As you've thought about the ongoing continued modernization of the practices of this organization across your tenure now of about 5 years, what are some of the bigger rocks that you've moved along the way to ensure that progress continues to be made, while also being, of course, mindful of the remarkable foundation that you found when you joined the organization?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. There's sort of some art and there's some science, I think. What I mean by that is, walking in the door and being able to participate on, as I describe it, that listening tour, the listening tour that frankly never ends, right? But in the early days, really making sure that even if I couldn't meet people in person in those early COVID days, that I spent enough time listening to the stories of what was working well and what was working less well in the minds of my peers, in the minds of other leaders, in the minds of, kind of a cross-functional or diagonal slice of members of my team. And at some point, you begin to triangulate what you're hearing and gain a better understanding of, hey, what would be some of the things we should aspire to do or to be? And in some cases, where they're really big and they're really aspirational versus where we were at the start. Hey, what would be a meaningful chunk, right? What would be something meaningful we could do that would start generating some buy-in and some, belief in what we've now described as the bigger possible. What I mean by the bigger possible is, a term that we coined to include in a revamp back in 2022 of our core values. We did a reach back. We looked at what had been our 9 kind of key core values, which are, great words that described who we were, things like integrity, things like, prudence and other great meaningful words, but not really that pithy. They don't really roll off the tongue, right? And you don't really understand in particular what that might look like and what it means in terms of, who we are for each other, for our clients and for our community. So we did this revamp. And one of the key phrases that we came to was belief in the bigger possible. And what I would describe for you, Peter, is for me, that's the most impactful of the five. I resonate with that most. I probably even might have coined the term. I don't know. I don't want to take credit for it. But the idea there was, hey, look, what we're doing already is good. And we could get a little bit better. And getting a little bit better every day is a proven method, right? We know this. But at the same time, we also know that can take time. And the amount of time we have to meet customer expectations versus the amount of time it would take to get there incrementally sometimes doesn't match up. So this idea of imagining a bigger possible, even on the way to something really aspirational, getting people behind it and demonstrating that we can do it, right? That it is possible for us to achieve an outcome so that people can be equipped with a better approach to change in an environment that really demands it, right? If the environment didn't demand it before COVID, it certainly did once COVID hit, right? The digital, you and I spoke about that back a few years ago, I think, digitization hit everyone, even, people who hadn't been users of smartphones to buy their groceries had to out of necessity during COVID. So all of a sudden, digitization was broadly upon us, no matter what. And so, from my perspective, Peter, it's been important for us to pick a few use cases. This office, I'll use it again, was a great example of it. We took what had been, in the largest case, a more than 40-year-old office building that we owned, that we actually built, and opened back in 1982, I think it was. And it just wasn't serving us anymore. Hadn't been for some time, certainly in the post-COVID environment. Even less so, given the amount of work that can be done remotely and the amount of work that became digitized. You just didn't need an operations center that had the same space and capability, facility dimensions that we had in that building. We were able to, come up with a plan and approach that there were a lot of people around the bank who said, yeah, I don't think anyone's going to buy that, right? I don't think this is going to be something we'll have the appetite to do. But we were able to really think about in a less conventional way, hey, how could we monetize these assets we own and take a bigger possible approach and do something really significant for today's colleagues and importantly for tomorrow's as well. For today's customers who drive by, we're situated right along a really busy highway, here in Metro Detroit. We're showing up in a really real way. We had a refreshed rebrand of our logo back a couple of years ago that features prominently outside the building, for example. And so people are really thinking, hey, what's going on at Comerica? This is pretty exciting. So it's a really tangible, physical, visible example of what's possible when we all align, when we come up, with a business plan that makes sense. And we've taken it all the way through execution. So the idea to plan, to strategy, to execution. And here we are. And as I said, 2,100 people call this home. We point to this as an example of the bigger possible in action, so that even if, you're working in another segment of the business, you can understand physically, right? And visibly, how having office space like this, we've taken this around the country. It actually, started much earlier under Amy Pillivan's leadership in smaller offices around the country, but now to be able to do it this way, more than 60% of our colleague base is working out of office space that has a similar look and feel, what we've dubbed co-work, Comerica work, and workplace environment. So, again, listening to her, understanding what's working well, what's working less well, understanding the aspiration, carving out something that's achievable but meaningful enough under the heading of the bigger possible to gain buy-in. And then even for the doubters who might be standing waiting to see what happens, when you sort of bring, that strategy and plan through and you execute on it, people start to believe. And other things become possible that maybe previously were deemed difficult, challenging, or impossible. So I think, that's an example. We also, from a tech perspective, have an almost industry-leading cloud environment. What do I mean by that? When I joined back 5 years ago, my predecessor, Bruce's predecessor, had done some great work leading us into the cloud. So that started before we joined. I think, what Bruce and I have done is really doubled down, if you will, on that area of focus. We made the determination that our on-premise data centers that existed in our office buildings, would be modernized, and we would migrate everything we could to the cloud, and anything that didn't make sense to run in the cloud, because there are some payloads that don't necessarily are not cloud relevant so much. We embarked on colo locations with another provider outside of our office buildings, and far enough apart that from a disaster recovery perspective, we're meeting all of the standards and requirements. And we've executed that program and plan. We will be closing the last of our on-premise data centers later this quarter, first quarter of 25. And we are north of 80% of our applications are either in the cloud or software as a service. We use a number of different providers of specialty software and services. So that combined is north of 80%, which we're really, really proud of as well. So those are just a couple, Peter, maybe. And I know I'm leaving out a lot of the great work that our other teams have done, but those are some pretty tangible examples that I think, could resonate, with your listeners.
No doubt. Thank you for sharing those. And as I hear you walk through that, and especially some of the changes you mentioned towards the end, I can see a better foundation being laid to take advantage of data and analytics. You talked about the function and that now has a leader over it, et cetera. I wonder if you could talk a bit about that now parlaying some of the important foundational work in ways that are accretive to the bank and of value to the customers.
Yeah, no doubt. And I think, aside from real estate fungibility and disaster recovery reasons and everything else, or even costs, right? The idea behind the strategic march to the cloud also is to unlock potential. Comerica has deeper pockets than, very smaller community banks, but not as deep pockets as some of our largest competitors, the GSIBs and so on, let alone the deep pockets that Amazon and AWS has. So to be able to take advantage of their investments, of AWS, where they've focused in particular, or even some of our third-party software as a service providers, where they can, where they've got R&D functions and other ways to really think about the capabilities of the future, where we can participate in that. We're bringing those capabilities to our customer base or to our colleague base who serve our customers. We have no pride of ownership there, where we can take advantage of, commodity capabilities. That enables, Bruce and his team in particular to focus a little bit more specifically on the places where we really do have secret sauce, and where we really do need to differentiate in particular, either by building things, ourselves, or by actually chaining together some of the capabilities from, the very best providers and taking advantage of, things that, for example, AWS has to offer. And so, for us, that's been very, very important, and has enabled us to do more per dollar than we would have been able to had we not, had we remained somewhat parochial and not been able to take advantage of, what AWS in particular and some of these other third parties have been able to bring to market. That will continue to be our strategy as we move forward. And, as such, we spend a lot of time, with industry players like the ones I mentioned, even, like Gartner and others, to have to make sure that we're keeping our finger on the pulse of what is going on, both the broader trends that kind of cross industry, not specific or unique to financial services. For example, discussions on quantum computing. And even though that seems a little far from the boat at the moment, in some ways it'll be here before we know it if we don't start planning now. And if we don't familiarize ourselves, with all of the various ways in which computing is likely to change when quantum comes into the mix. And so, we're spending time, in those areas. We spend time, even though we don't have our own sort of blockchain factory like some of the biggest banks and certainly many others in other industries have, keeping abreast of developments, participating where we can in various, early days, if you can call it early days in a technology that's been available for 10 years. But, it's been slow to adopt. We're still at a point where, at least in banking financial services, some of these technologies haven't completely taken off quite yet, but it doesn't mean we can choose to ignore that. We need to continue to think about the ways in which they can provide benefit to our customer base. So I would say, as Bruce likes to say, we prefer to punch above our weight class. And we do that through, participating in the ecosystem through the help of both, our partners that are providers of technology and services, folks like MetaStrategy, right? Folks like Gartner, folks like, others who can advise us and help us make sure that we're seeing the future as holistically as we should to benefit the company and our customer base overall.
Yeah, very interesting. And I'd love to, as you talk about some of the topics that are either clear and present or out in the future, like a quantum computing, for example, how do you organize the team to do that level of investigation as you contemplate areas where trends to potentially ride, or at least to investigate as to their applicability to your organization and the possibility of implementation leading to faster reaching the destination implied by the strategy faster, for example, or a better customer outcome? What are the ways in which you and the team do that experimentation?
Yeah, I would describe for you two things. One, and you mentioned it earlier, our focus on so many foundational elements has been intentional, with an eye toward a future where we would need to move even more quickly, as quantum develops, as AI becomes something more real and tangible, over time. The role that, eventually someday crypto may or may not play, in banking and financial services, the role that fintechs play today, both complementary to banks as well as competitive to banks and so on. So, number one, I think, focusing on the fundamentals is critical, because you can't lift up your head to focus on the things coming, without making sure that your foundation is solid and ready to go. So we've had a very concerted focus on that over the course of time. And I think we'll continue to make sure, the team has a strong focus on the fundamentals of what we're here to do all day, every day, number one. And then separately is really ensuring that we're, reading and participating and listening. There are no shortage of prognosticators on, any number of topics. We have great partnerships also across our lines of business. Allison Fleming joined us as the leader of a combined payments function that we built out. I think that will be 3 years ago this coming summer. And she joined us to lead that payments function in the business. She reports into my peer, Peter Sefcik, who's the chief banking officer. And so she and her team of product leaders is a great example of people who have their finger on the pulse of what's going on in money movement and payments, which is really where some of the biggest innovations in financial services are happening. And our technology and cybersecurity teams are partnering really well to ensure that we're staying at the forefront of where service providers are going, where the trends are, even from a regulatory perspective, how things are evolving and changing over time. And so I think, tech not going it alone, if that makes sense, when we have to be, in some cases, bringing these ideas and concepts back into our businesses. But at the same time, the businesses very often are out speaking at conferences and participating in industry forums. And we need to ensure that we've got the right connective tissue across our teams to take advantage of it, be aligned on, which choices we're going to make and not. I mentioned earlier about deep pockets. Even if you're AWS, you're almost printing money, but not quite. You still have to pick your lane. You have to make choices and decisions about where you're going to focus. And I think, with a few, fewer zeros at our disposal and discretion, that intentionality is really, really important. And I think that alignment with the business is where we get the best outcome and the best sort of bang for our buck, Peter, ensuring that we're not spending time on things that are so far afield from where we might have the appetite to go in a 3 or 5 year horizon, that we're not, sort of wasting the precious resources we've got on things that maybe matter a little bit less.
Well articulated. I appreciate that overview as well. Megan, I wanted to pivot briefly to ask you a bit about one aspect of your background that I didn't mention in the intro is that you spent considerable time at General Motors prior to your time at Ally. And that has been such a remarkable talent factory. The number of your peers who've gone on to consequential roles in technology and beyond, present companies certainly in that category, is really remarkable. And I think to some who might think of the auto industry as one that is certainly a difficult industry, no one can grapple with that. But also one that, with companies that go in and out of Chapter 11 across their history and have gone through major expansions and retractions and so on, I think would be amazed at the diaspora of remarkable talent that is spread across the landscape. And I wonder if you could reflect a little bit about your time there and what was a difference maker for you as perhaps a catalyst to the remarkable heights you've reached.
Yeah, it's pretty fascinating. It's been fascinating to watch and to experience, to be honest. I joined General Motors back in 2000, almost accidentally. I had, started my career at Pricewaterhouse, now PwC, in consulting. That's what led, University of Michigan graduate with a psych degree into technology, right? Going to a boot camp training to learn how to code for 12 weeks in that pre-Y2K craze. And, I always thought I'd go back and, get my master's degree, my MBA, and go into change management and business process reengineering, but kind of tech stuck. And, GM was a client of a small software company I was working for at the time for a very short tenure. And they were looking for somebody to help with a data warehousing project where they were going to bring together for the first time the data from all of the various divisions, the GM credit card and OnStar and all these things. And I thought, oh, this sounds great. And I joined and I thought I might stay there a year or two. And I stayed there 9. And I stayed there in no small part due to the leadership of Ralph Shigenda, who was the global CIO of GM at the time. And, whether GM was exactly Fortune 1, they were right around Fortune 1 during that time frame, one of the biggest companies in the world. And I didn't have the appreciation until I got there, and maybe it was even a few years into my tenure there, of what that really meant as a technologist. What it meant was you were doing things bigger than anyone else was. And on a global scale, we were delivering technology solutions that were deployed once and used globally. I remember at Service and Parts Operations, we were building the diagnostic tool that all dealers in all machine shops around the world would use to diagnose vehicles. And when you think about that for a minute, we were running that out of a data center in Auburn Hills, Michigan, and there's a secondary data center, an old EDS facility in Plano, Texas, right? And, but still, at the time, that idea of build once and run it and then deploy it in a 24/7 fashion, across the globe was just wasn't happening in very many spaces. And for me, and for many of my peers who, since, as you say, have gone on to some pretty incredible careers, what a great training ground to do things at scale that otherwise weren't being done. The model that Ralph employed, which was really, a relatively thin management layer and a lot of outsourced tech, EDS had spun in and out of GM in the 90s, for example. And so, at that point in GM's history, technology was largely outsourced to EDS, and it was overseen by technologists, not just management folks, but technologists who had various specialties. And in fact, I had to go back to Carnegie Mellon and get my Master's of Science in Technology rather than an MBA because Ralph was that specific about having technologists really running the show and ensuring that, that we, as it were owning the technology decisions for the enterprise, even if the doers were largely, in a third-party company, which eventually then was distributed to many other third-party companies in 2006. But it was a really fascinating time to learn scale, to learn outsourcing, to eventually learn about offshore, what the best practices are in those various models, what worked really well, what worked less well. We went through a whole journey on CMMI journey to get to the certain maturity level. CMMI level 3 was the standard, and some teams, if you were doing more of the plant floor technology, had to get to CMMI level 5. The kinds of things we were doing, again, at the foundation were so critical. And I think all of us who participated there really had a bird's eye view into how to manage really meaningful technology. I tell this story often, Peter, that 2004-ish timeframe, I think I was in a role where I was running the brand site, so Cadillac.com. Cadillac had a commercial spot at the Super Bowl, right? And those were really expensive back then. I don't know what they're going for now, but then it was, sort of these really eye-opening numbers. Well, you would get 10 million hits to Cadillac.com within 10 seconds of that ad showing. And this was before elastic compute, right? Like that didn't exist then. So we had strung a bunch of these servers together based upon a whole bunch of math and a whole bunch of science. And we then, had a whole bunch of sort of keeping our fingers crossed and hopefully some luck to ensure that Cadillac.com could handle the volume. Otherwise, all that spent at the Super Bowl ad was probably not worth it, right? And so, that was a super memorable and meaningful example for me of what it meant to do things at a scale. I'm sure there were other companies that, and other people who have something similar that they could describe from other industries. But it was, it was really impactful, and we were all held very accountable for the outcomes we achieved. And so I think there was a degree of accountability and ownership that the leaders at GM took that we've all carried with us, as we've moved on, throughout our careers to various places where we've landed.
Very interesting. It's so emblematic also. It's interesting and important, I think, for us to reflect from time to time about how much changes in a relatively short amount of time. That story from less than a generation ago, and yet the means of operation were so different. Obviously, a lot that we can relate to today, but amazing to think about the progress that's been made in a relatively short amount of time. But thank you for those broader reflections about your time at GM. Really fascinating insights as to how meaningful that was for you and the reasons why it was. I wanted to circle back around with regard to trends. We talked about a number of them, those that you are already leveraging, those you anticipate leveraging, or at least continuing to investigate. Any others that you would underscore that are on your roadmap, or at least that you're curious about as you reflect on the year ahead or the years ahead, as the case may be?
Yeah, I think there are a few, we have a number of, AI use cases and a few Gen AI use cases that are already, working. And I'm sure that some of your listeners would say, hey, we've been doing this for a few years. I'll just remind the group that in a regulated industry, it's a little trickier sometimes, and you have to, you've got maybe a few more T's to cross and I's to dot sometimes than in less regulated industries. So we've got a number of things going on, and have seen a great amount of success, both internally in terms of providing more efficiency and effectiveness in our operations and in how we respond in the speed of turnaround time and in response to our customers. In particular, that's getting our feet wet and getting everyone comfortable, with how we might think about expanding some of those use cases in the years to come. Even as we think about risk management, certainly a key topic in financial services more broadly, the ways in which, risk management testing and control testing could be enabled by AI, doing more work, crunching through more than what, a whole set of humans could do, really freeing up the humans to do what humans do best, right? And sort of the more subjective and more relationship focused, set of things that my belief, machines will never take over, as we get into the future. So I think that that's very real, very here to stay, no doubt. And a big, reason that, Sava Dasani and her team in the data and analytics office are as focused as they are on, leveraging cloud capabilities in particular, around, not just ensuring our data is organized correctly, but, are we really capturing, as she would say, the data exhaust from all of the transactions that, our customers perform day in, day out, all of the interactions we have, to really gain a better sense of, anticipating our customers' needs and so on, and make sure that, our products and services are geared correctly toward that as we get into the future. So I think, that only benefits the consumer, even if the initial use cases sometimes are internal. Like I said, there's things like efficiency and turnaround time, lower error rates, and the like. And I think that will translate into really substantial benefit for our customers into the future. Aside from that, we have to always make sure we're containing costs. I think, I've been reading a lot since the first of the year, just in the publications that I subscribe to, around, even announcements AWS made at their conference, at their reInvent conference back in early December, around, cost modeling and how you can control what otherwise could be runaway costs in running cloud, workloads and so on. No one moves to the cloud for cost efficiency, I don't think. But certainly now that, so many businesses have chosen the cloud, how do you manage that and make sure that you're getting the benefit of your spend, and you don't have runaway costs that are actually impeding you to make the investments in things like AI and so on. And so I think that that's going to be important for us, not as sexy maybe, but such an enabler to the outcomes that we want to create as a bank. We still know that money doesn't grow on trees. So you have to harvest as much as you can from what you've got. And part of that is running as efficiently and effectively as possible. So I think that's really important. I mentioned, quantum, and certainly, Juan Rodriguez, our CISO, is concerned and actively, thinking through with his team and some of our partners, what does that mean for cryptography, and ciphers, and, and how things are going to evolve as quantum computing, that'll land in the good guys' hands as well as in the not so good guys' hands as well. And there are some real threats that we know will emerge that are being discussed across industry. So we need to be aware of that and prepared for that. But also, in an era where quantum computing is present, we're imagining that it really will not take the place of traditional computing, much in the way that mainframes still exist, in particular in banking financial services, because of the great job mainframes do at crunching high volumes of data and doing some of the other things that mainframes do best. So we imagine this sort of hybrid compute world will emerge over time, where, there will be certain types of workloads that are best for various environments, and how we orchestrate that will become, really critical for us. So enterprise architecture and some of our other leaders are really ensuring that we're thinking about that in the right way. And as we get forward in these next couple of years, organizing more and more around it. Right now, it's more think tank stuff than it will be for us as it gets later. And again, we imagine the partner ecosystem will serve a lot of our needs, but it's our job to stitch those together the right way to benefit our company and our customers. So those are some of the big ones that I think, are top of mind for us across cyber, tech, data and analytics, and so on. I think those in particular are really, really important. And even contact center, to be honest, the ways in which we can continue to improve customer self-service, and, how AI can enable that. Certainly any of us know when you call into a contact center today, if you can self-serve with something really easy that understands your voice, great. If it doesn't understand your voice, you're, kind of at some point wanting to throw your phone across the room. We're, seeking out more of the former, not the latter. And so, who is providing some real capability for us there to serve the customers the way they best want and need to be served. And I know my kids, right? They don't want to talk to someone. They would rather text or interact on social media rather than having a phone call with someone. And I think that's true, even for, older generations. So no doubt, that whole self-service idea is gaining more traction all the time. So I think these things are interrelated. How do we provide services to our customers from an operations perspective using the best of the data that we have and can get to enable, AI capabilities that, can serve customers in some cases quicker.
Yeah, really interesting, and a number of areas for us to monitor as the months and years wear on as to the progress made in those very disciplines. Thank you so much for mentioning those. I wanted to conclude, Megan, if you don't mind, with anything you've recently read, watched, and or listened to that you would recommend to others. Anything coming here out of the holidays, now early in the new year, that has caught your attention that you'd recommend?
Yeah, I would tell you, Peter, and this is probably an unconventional answer to your question, but, I was able to enjoy some real downtime over the holidays, and in a way that I'm not always able to. The occupational hazard, and a lot of people, I think, who listen to your podcast will chuckle with this because it'll resonate with them. The occupational hazard of being in tech and cyber and in some of these other high operational areas is that downtime doesn't come just because you want it to. Things happen when you least expect. But this year we had a lot of downtime, and I actually benefited from getting away from my normal kind of reading and publications, and I didn't pick up anything serious or business minded over those couple of weeks. I spent a lot of time with my 21-year-old and 19-year-old. Binging some, Netflix new series and some things like that, and watching some of the old, Christmas movies and things, just some nostalgia. And I share that with this group only because I do think, getting away from it all a bit has this real benefit of rejuvenating you, to be ready for the next thing. And, for me, having that downtime means, I might not have my finger on the pulse of the latest things that happened in the last 3-4 weeks. But I can get back after it in a way that I didn't feel like I was splitting my time too much between spending some precious time with my kids who are off in college and away, states and states away from where we live. And the things I like to do, for my professional life and keep abreast of, and so on. So I'll have a better answer for you next time. But this time I would just tell you, I really enjoyed, some downtime so that I could really be refreshed for everything 2025 and beyond is going to bring.
Anything you'd suggest we binge from Netflix?
No Good Deed was really sort of interesting. That was an 8-episode thing. Ray Romano, Lisa Kudrow, and some others. And a good few plot twists and turns over the course of the 8 short episodes, but one that, whether it was my kids or my husband, everybody sort of enjoyed as we went through it. So that's the recommendation I'd make.
We'll put that on the list. I appreciate that. And great reflections as well about the need to recharge the batteries from time to time also. It shouldn't always be serious stuff. But anyway, I really appreciate, Megan, as always, you taking a little time out of your busy schedule and enlightening us on the many things that you and your team are doing, the expansion of your responsibilities over the past couple of years, and your view into what's to come in a variety of years as well. As always, it's been a really enlightening conversation, and I greatly appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Peter, and thanks for everything you and your team do and your partnership with us as well.